You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. All right, folks, very few African Americans serving in the military have ever had 4 stars on their shoulders. My next guest, he is one of them. He was the first leader of AFRICOM, that command when it was started under President George H.W. Bush. General Kip Ward joins us right now. General, glad to have you here. You heard the Secretary of Defense there. General, look, you've had to deal with these issues, being over AFRICOM, dealing with the issues with Ebola and other issues happening all across the globe. Explain to the audience, really being in the room, how the military operates when something like this here. This is a national security issue as well. You know, how do you mobilize? We heard that in the military, look, that they've canceled all domestic international flight, allowing people to stay where they are. So give us a sense of how the military is operating and thinking right now.
Good evening, Roland, and thanks for inviting me to participate this evening. A couple of dimensions that we want to consider here. First of all, the military, as the Department of Defense and all of its entities, has this primary mission, obviously, of safeguarding our nation's security, both at home and abroad, in varying ways. As a brigade commander, for instance, I deployed my brigade to Florida for Operation Hurricane Andrew relief because our citizens at home needed the support that we, the military, could provide. The second, and I'll go back into more of that in a bit, and the second dimension is that as a citizen, we too are subjected to the same sorts of things that every American citizen is subjected to, be it at home or abroad. And so doing the things that are prudent measures that every citizen would do, that is also a part of this dynamic. So when you look at the specifics of the reaction, the activity being undertaken by the military, candidly at this point, my understanding is that you have as well. I'm not deeply involved in this at this time, but understanding the processes from the standpoint of what you do to protect the force. And those are the things that are common things that are being done by every American citizen that candidly are our first line of defense when it comes to protecting ourselves from COVID-19, this spread of this virus. And then secondly, the things that can be done by the military as an institution of our federal government that will support the efforts of our other agencies, local, state governments, with respect to being able to respond, address contingencies as they arise. And in this particular situation, we're learning things every day, and then being able to present these sorts of contingencies, alternatives to the decision maker such that those resources can be brought to bear if needed, where needed, and in a timely way.
When we hear people say the military should be dispatched, National Guard should be dispatched, if that's the case, how are they used? Used to do what?
The dispatch of the National Guard, obviously, in our system, those forces belong to state governors. And as you indicated, and I've heard, many of the state governors are in fact dispatching and using those National Guard forces to do a multitude of things. It could be assisting the state and local authorities to do things such as distribution of food, other material that help to abate the crisis. They could be used to help transport, provide logistics. It's basically in logistics support, and in some cases, potentially to provide a security umbrella for the conduct of other activities under the direction of the state and local officials when it comes to the National Guard. And at this point in time, it is the National Guard who is under the jurisdiction of the governors and the territorial entities to provide that type of support. And it's wholly appropriate that governors take their National Guard outfits and provide that type of logistical support in order to support the activities of their state and local entities.
We heard them talking about the Defense Production Act and then what that does to free up. Can you explain again for the audience who doesn't know anything about the Defense Production Act, what that even does?
Essentially, in a national emergency, those industry activities that produce commodities that are important in addressing a particular situation can be directed by the president to then develop as well as to produce those items of equipment that are important to addressing the national scenario. And so in this case, those private entities that make various things that are important in addressing this situation because of the invocation of the Defense Production Act, those institutions and those jobs, those particular agencies, those corporations devote their resources to producing products that particularly designed to address this situation. And that is done under the auspices of the Defense Production Act.
Hey, General Ward, this is A. Scott Bolden. Good seeing you again. I hope you're doing well. My question has to do with what we're not seeing. In your opinion, what aren't we doing? What aren't we seeing? What aren't we moving forward as the federal government addresses this coronavirus? For example, I raised earlier in the show the Army Corps of Engineers could be brought in to lead to set up hospitals. They build bridges. They do all kinds of incredible things all over the world, and yet we don't see them in some leadership role. We don't see FEMA in some leadership role. I know you've got some experience with working with FEMA. And so what aren't we doing, and why aren't those agencies leading, or why aren't we hearing about them?
Yeah. Hi. Hello there, Scott. And two things that we need to understand about that process. One, in our federal system of government, and regardless of how we may think about it, and having been a part of many forms of government, this one is the one that I would certainly want to be living under, where when you get to the type of disaster situation that exists, and this is clearly a global disaster situation and is impacting our country, but the state, local authorities put the demand on the table. You don't see generals like I was marching into an area and saying, this is what I'm going to do, move aside. Now, there may be times when some might want to see that, but again, that happens in places where I've been, and certainly you have as well, and that's not how our system of government is established. And so unless a lot of other things change, that piece of it is the way it is, and candidly, I'm okay with that. Secondly, when it comes to what's not being seen, I mentioned the fact of contingencies. You know, the United States military, we plan for the unknown, not because we know the specifics, but when it comes to providing support, a range of contingency actions that can be taken, from moving logistics and supplies to safeguarding facilities to providing stocks that may exist in the stocks of the Department of Defense that could be then used in that civilian contingency, from airlift to other sorts of things, are appropriate. The response is contingent upon the examination of the specific activity at the time, as opposed to doing things, and to use a term that I use when I stood at AFRICOM, you want to add value and at a minimum do no harm. And so as you add value, that value must be from an informed position, and that information is derived from how you understand what you're getting from state and local entities. And then once that's understood, you respond in kind as best as possible when it comes to moving forward and supplying with either logistics, augmentation of personnel, some organizational activities. And so the various entities, be it the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is basically a civilian entity. It's basically a civilian entity that comes together. It doesn't exist in one blob. It comes together as pieces may be needed from the contractor support that's available. You have certainly a professional corps that's there that operates day in and day out. But when it comes to standing up and bringing things together, be it out of our National Guard and Reserve, mobilizing these activities is what goes on. The plans that exist to do that are plans that are contingency plans based on a range of scenarios that can be tailored to the specific situation at hand.
General Ward, it's Lauren Burke. How are you? During your time in the Army, there's a lot of rumors right now about quarantining people. I don't know whether they're true or not. It might be the Russians playing around with us. But when you were in the Army, you ever hear of a plan that sounded like it could actually happen, where Americans would be quarantined someplace for any reason, whether it was disease or anything else?
Well, certainly quarantine is a term that we all are aware of. There is, from the standpoint of my specific understanding, a quarantine for the sake of quarantine isn't something that was done. You have a circumstance or a situation where to safeguard, to prevent, that certainly is there. But no, I've not been apprised of any specific situation whereby you quarantine for the sake of quarantine, other than some existential situation that exists that makes quarantine a very valid course of action to be taken, as would be potentially the case here. And as right now, in a sense, we are there. I mean, I'm here now, I will, quote unquote, grounded, because I'm taking the advice of those who say it's best to stay put and prevent the spread of this thing. And when you see folks who don't do that voluntarily, well, it's kind of like what President Kennedy said many, many years ago, ask what you can do for your country. What every individual American citizen can do to help combat this is to interact as little as possible, because the more you interact, the greater potential is for this thing to spread in ways that we still don't understand candidly. And the greatest prevention to that is to stay put so that you don't risk the spread of this disease. And in today's global environment, it's even more a potential if the mixing, the interaction is such that it just enhances the potential for that happening. And so quarantine, if the situation demands it and requires it for many reasons, would be an appropriate course of action, given all other options and alternatives having been tried, tested, or deemed to be would not work.
Hi, General Gene Craig here. Question. So we have an absence of leadership right now. And so my question to you is, being someone that oversaw AFRICOM and, has a thorough understanding of, what disaster response looks like on multiple different levels and different scales, if you were president, who would be the one person that you would, appoint essentially as the point person to handle this response, to bring all the levers of government together, local, state, federal, and how would you empower them? Because I think that's what we need right now. I mean, a lot of the governors are stepping up, but the federal response just isn't clicking right now.
Yeah, well, I don't think I could answer that, because I probably don't have all the information that would be important to make that determination. Again, we live in a federal system of government, and that federal system of government that I swore for 40 years to obey and respect, and I still do. Nothing has changed about that. And unless we're to throw a lot of other things, then we have to ensure that what we do in our federal system of government works. And in these cases, and it is truly a national scenario, but our state, local authorities that are backdropped and supported by our federal response capabilities and resources are where we ought to be, and collaborating and cooperating and discussing so that things are known, facts are known as best as we can, because there is no 100% guarantee of any day. These things are changing daily. And one of the, I guess I'll call it one of our axioms that we use in the military, no plan survives once you cross the line of departure. So what we were thinking last week is different than what's happening today, and will be different than what goes on tomorrow. And so to be wedded to a particular thing because it was what it was a week ago is candidly reduces your ability to respond. You respond to the scenario as it changes, doing your very best to be out in front of it and doing those proactive things as best as you can determine will support where you are and where you want to go. And so for me, who that person might be, again, not in a position to say. The involvement of the team is important, and listening to what the team brings to the table from the varying perspectives to make a decision is where we are, and I'd probably be on the same side of moving forward.
General, I do have to ask you this here. Speed matters. Look, you served in the military. You know what happens when people wait. You know what happens on the battlefield when folks say, well, no, let's do this 48 hours from now as opposed to do it now. It sort of sometimes it works both ways. You got to have enough time to get your troops prepared, have your logistics in place, your supply lines to be able to execute something. But when you look at something along those like this here, when you look at a video, and guys, go ahead and play that video again. This was February 12th of this year. and there was a coronavirus hearing in the Department of Homeland Security. And Senator Kamala Harris put this video on her Twitter feed on February 12th, 2020. I want you to listen to this, and we'll talk about today being almost a month later. Guys, go ahead and play that.
The American people also, Mr. Chairman, need to hear from the officials who are currently responsible for addressing this. And we need a public hearing with current government officials as soon as possible. It is critical to my state of California. I have spoken with some of the current officials and asked them why they are not here today. And they did not have they did not have a good response for why they are not. In fact, they went on to say, well, we have to take time to prepare talking points. The American people deserve them to be here this morning.
I'm not asking you to critique this administration. If you choose to do so, you will. But when you think back to that, February 12th, 2020, when you look at the comments where Trump was like, we got to contain, it's under control, I'm not really worried about it. Here we are a little more than a month later. We still aren't even testing, 1,000 people a day. There are things that are happening more than a month later that should have been really in place a month ago. Can you speak to, when time is of the essence, how every day delayed makes this situation even worse?
Yeah, Roland, and I appreciate that. The essentials of time are clearly important with respect to what you do, when you do it, and how you do it, and all based on predicated upon the information available at hand at the time. We have a requirement to take your best information you have, and based on that information, take decisions and actions that are reflective of your understanding at that particular point in time, given who has the ability to certainly bring resources to bear. Unfortunately for me, I don't know what was going on February 12th, other than what I certainly recall from the news media as well. So I can't address and say what should have been done or not done at that point in time because I'm not aware of the information. I will tell you this. As a commander, there were times when I made a decision very, very quickly that I said, wow, I should have maybe waited 3 or 4 days because I had some information that I didn't have at the time. And there were times when information that I didn't have, but I just felt I needed to make a decision. I made that as well. And it turned out to be a good decision at the time. But there have been other times also that the decision was made and said, it would have been a better decision had I waited. So it's not the type of scenario that you can say absolutely what should have been the case or not case, not having this thing called facts bearing on the situation. And you need to take advantage of those to the very best you can. And that's what we tried to do. And I would imagine and guess that that's what the leaders have tried to do at that time. I'm not sure. I don't know. I wasn't there, not privy to that. But I'm certain that from the standpoint of the military point of view and perspective, you have military, especially here in the Homeland Defense arena, the Northern Command, that they were doing those sorts of things based on information at time and preparing themselves, looking at the contingencies, determining what might be available, should be called upon, and then preparing to offer that up as soon as it was requested by the National Command Authority or by the states.
All right. Retired General Kip Ward, we surely appreciate you joining us, giving us that analysis. I keep saying this. It's important for us that we see African Americans who are doctors or who are experts in pandemics, but also in the military out here, because unfortunately in mainstream media, you swear when it comes to black generals, only one exists is Colin Powell. So always glad to have your voice, and we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot.
Proud to serve.
All right, thanks, sir. Tell your wife hello.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin unfiltered video in just one moment.
All right, so a lot of y'all always asking me about some of the pocket squares that I wear. Now, Robert don't have one on. Nope. Now, I don't particularly like the white pocket squares. I don't like even the silk ones. And so I was reading GQ magazine a number of years ago, and I saw this guy who had this pocket square here, and it looks like a flower. This is called a shibori pocket square. This is how the Japanese manipulate the fabric to create this sort of flower effect. So I'm going to take it out and then place it in my hand so you see what it looks like. And I said, man, this is pretty cool. And so I tracked down, it took me a year to find a company that did it. And so they make these about 47 different colors. And so I love them because, again, as men, we don't have many accessories to wear, so we don't have many options. And so this is really a pretty cool pocket square. Now, what I love about this here is you saw when it's in the pocket, you know, it gives you that flower effect like that. But if I wanted to also, unlike other, because if I flip it and turn it over, it actually gives me a different type of texture. And so therefore, it gives me a different look. So there you go. So if you actually want to get one of these Shibori pocket squares, we have them in 47 different colors. All you got to do is go to RolandSMartin.com/pocket squares. All right, so first of all, that graphic is way too small. So tomorrow we're going to run it right down here all across the screen. So it's RolandSMartin.com/pocket squares. All you got to do is go to my website and you can actually get this. Now, for those of you who are members of our Bring the Funk fan club, there's a discount for you to get our pocket squares. That's why you also got to be a part of our Bring the Funk fan club. And so that's what we want you to do. And so it's pretty cool. So if you want to jazz your look up, you can do that. In addition, y'all see me with some of the feather pocket squares. My sister, who's a designer, she actually makes these. They're all custom made. So when you also go to the website, you can also order one of the customized feather pocket squares right there at RolandSMartin.com/pocket squares. So please do so. And of course, it goes to support the show. And again, if you're a Bring the Funk fan club member, you get a discount. This is why you should join the fan club. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.